You have questions, and we have answers. We found 3 real estate investing topics burning up the BiggerPockets forums and creating so much hot debate that we had to weigh in. Whether you're just starting out or already have a mature portfolio, stay tuned to learn from the experts. Hey friends, Dave Meyer here. Today on the show, we are answering your questions. Ashley Kerr is here with me, and we dug into the BiggerPockets forums and found a few trending topics we wanted to weigh in on. We'll talk about whether it's ever a good idea to buy a property that's not properly permitted, how to analyze a house hack deal so you buy your first property right. We'll also talk about estimating a scope of work for your first rehab and how to manage a renovation project if you're investing long distance. Ashley, I know these topics are right in your wheelhouse. Are you ready?
Yeah, I am. This is like I'm taking a quiz here, getting grilled on my rookie knowledge.
Yeah, well, we are going to be grading you at the end. So, all right, let's get into our first question, which actually is doubly up your alley because it comes from someone on the forums who is in upstate New York. I know you're technically in Western New York. I want to properly recognize, but this question comes from Roman, who's operating, again, in upstate New York. Roman says, I found a good multifamily home in upstate. It's a legal 2-unit that can cash flow $900 a month in an economically growing area. However, the house has had a new kitchen and bathroom put in without permits. This was done 2 owners ago, and the current owner has been renting the property without issue for 7 years. If I bought the property, I'd want to retroactively permit the work and get the house up to code. House is selling for $380. Even if getting the permits costs $30K, it's still a good buy. Does anyone have any experience with something like this? How much could it cost? And is it a good idea? Ashley, what do you think about this one?
Yeah, so going backwards into getting permits is never a fun thing to do. So luckily, I haven't had to do it, but I definitely have talked to other investors who have had to rip out walls and let the inspector look inside the wall to see what the work was done. But the first thing I would start with is talking to the code enforcement person in that area. So who is actually in charge of giving out permits, who actually goes out and does the inspection on these properties. And I would start having a conversation with them about that because you don't own the property yet. So you want to see what would they expect to make this property permitted, then you can kind of build your budget from there. So if the inspector says that, yes, I would come in and I would need to open up the walls to see that the plumbing was done correctly, the electric done correctly, this would be the process. So they can give you an idea of that. The next thing is to get the scope of work from the person that you're buying the house from, if they have an idea of what was actually done. So when it says it was remodeled, was it just new cabinets put in and, no walls were ripped apart, no electric was redone except for maybe new outlets, things like that? Having an understanding of what the work was done can be really beneficial too when you go to the inspector and ask what would be the process to get this properly permitted. So some of the reasons you'd want to do this, even though the previous owner had no issues, is first, liability. Especially in New York, a tenant can sue you for anything. And if there was a fire and then you find out the electric wasn't permitted, you could end up being liable in this case. So for liability reasons, it would be good to have, the work that was done permitted on the property. Or in the future, if you ever want to go and get a permit for something else and the inspector comes in and says, oh, I don't have this, new electric panel in the kitchen. This, there was never a permit for this. This one says it should be from 1980. So going forward, getting the work corrected before you actually do any more projects in the property too.
Totally agree. Commending Roman here for doing the right thing and getting the work permitted because I don't know about you. I couldn't sleep if I knew there was like something even slightly illegal or off kilter in my property. I know it happens, but I have personally gotten out of contracts for finding out things like this. To your point, Ashley, if the scope of work's not going to be huge and it's not going to be super difficult, there's still reason to go ahead. But if it's a big thing, if it's structural, I've gotten to situations where I thought it was a legal duplex and they actually just added a unit illegally. That stuff scares me away personally.
Yeah.
Is there anything that would make you say, no, that's too much? Like if you had to vacate it or, you couldn't have tenants in it for a while, or like what are some of the red flags that you think Roman or other people who find themselves in this situation should look out for?
The biggest thing for me is if it's an unpermitted unit. So I actually walked a property before where it was 3 units and that's what they had it listed at. But when I walked the property, the agent for the seller said, okay, this is the deal with this. And you always know there's like some kind of catch to this. And it was that it was permitted as a duplex. So every year when they did their rental license, the upstairs tenant and the downstairs back tenant would say that they were together and they used both spaces and that they were on the lease together. So if you buy this property, you have to depend on whoever's renting those 2 units to lie on your behalf to the building inspector or go through the whole process of getting it permitted. And it didn't even have like a full kitchen. Like there was a lot of things that would take a lot of work to actually get that permitted as a 3rd unit. So we didn't end up buying that property. But that was like the biggest thing if it's just a whole unit that is not permitted. The next thing is really finding out how deep the inspector is going to have to dig. So if there are other issues that could be uncovered, like say they did remodel the kitchen and they did the electric, they did the plumbing, they did everything brand new, that's where I would be concerned as to like, what are the chances of it done correctly? What are the chances of it not done correctly? And also how much am I going to have to rip out and redo? Because again, if you're inheriting tenants, so tenants are coming with it, the building inspector says like, they can't live in this. It's not permitted. They need to move out while you rip out the walls. You're going to be putting them up into a hotel unless they agree to actually go and move somewhere else and end their lease agreement.
I've never done this, but I'm curious what you think of this. Some advice I would potentially give to Roman is, could you lock up this property under contract and get a contingency that you would permit it? And just as a reminder, in the post, the question that we are responding to, Roman said that even if he had to pay 30 grand for permit costs, he'd be willing to do that. So I'm wondering if Roman writes the contract in a way and says, hey, I'm going to try and get this permitted. Honestly, it's a kitchen and a bathroom. My estimation is that's probably going to be fine. Like it will probably take a couple weeks. You say, hey, like we're going to stretch out the closing and I will close on this in 90 days contingent on that I can get permits for under $20,000. And if not, I can back out of this contract. Depends on how competitive this deal is and how many other offers the seller might have. But for me, that would be a way that you can potentially get a great deal, ease your conscience and make sure everything is legal and above board, but still protect yourself against the worst case scenario.
And Dave, like a couple years ago, nobody wanted to do inspections or contingencies. What's your opinion on the market now? Like, are you still competitive if you put in a contingency like that in your offer?
It depends on the offer. I've done it this year already, and people have been willing to do it. I think the other thing about this is now that it's sort of like legally being disclosed, the seller's going to have to disclose that this work was done unpermitted, right, to everyone. And so this issue is going to keep coming up. So if you sort of present yourself as the reasonable person who's going to do the work to get it permitted, because the seller's probably now wondering if they're going to have to go do this. So you can basically solve that problem for them. If I were Roman, I'd probably try and not pay 30 grand for it right away. But if you also express willingness to pay some amount of money to get this closed, you might be the best option for the seller. That's just general, but it obviously is going to depend on the individual market, individual property.
Yeah, I think it's worth risking losing the deal than finding out that it's going to cost way more than 30 grand and be way more than a hassle. And I think that was like a couple of years ago as people got caught up, especially rookie investors, new investors, just wanting to get the deal and taking out that inspection, but not knowing enough about construction and about the property and then finding out problems later on. So I definitely think it's worth it, especially in this case. Even if the deal doesn't work out, like you're going to end up saving yourself money in the long run, most likely, if there are issues that you didn't find out.
For sure. Have you ever bought a deal without an inspection?
A ton of them.
Really?
But that's because I'm buying them so dilapidated.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
That it's like the inspector would go in there and literally just mark everything.
Be like, what are you doing?
One thing you can do is like if you've ever gotten an inspection done before or you know somebody that's done an inspection, look at the report that they actually fill out, because it's very detailed as to like every single line item, what the inspector is actually looking at. So like if you feel you don't want to do an inspection because your offer is going to be competitive, get a copy of an inspection. When you walk the property, go through everything that an inspector would actually look at. You're obviously not going to have the tools that they do, like checking, each outlet to make sure they work, unless you want to go and buy all that stuff. But, checking if there's insulation in the wall. So inspectors are well worth their money, but mine just would have been red, the whole inspection report. So
before we move on, today's podcast is brought to you by REsimpli, the all-in-one CRM built for real estate investors. Automate your marketing, skip trace for free, send direct mail, and connect with your leads all in one place. Head over to REsimpli.com/BiggerPockets now to start your free trial and get 50% off your first month. Next, we are moving on to a question from a first-time investor from San Antonio named Tanner. Tanner asks, any advice for someone trying to buy their first duplex and house hack? I currently have a pre-approval and I'm shopping for properties in the $250,000 to $350,000 range. My plan is to do a small value-add upgrades while I'm living in the property, but I'm stuck on the deal analysis. I want to be able to pull the trigger when a good deal comes along and be confident in my investment. What are the best ways to analyze a duplex house hack deal? A lot there. Where would you start with this? Because there's a couple questions here. It's like, how do you get over analysis paralysis? How do you analyze deals? How do you consider a house hack versus a traditional investment? What's like the first thing you would think about here, Ashley?
Well, how do you get good at anything?
Practice.
Yes. So that's the first thing. Use the BiggerPockets calculators. There's already the built-in worksheet going line by line, literally telling you every number you need to find and where to find it. There's the little question marks. You can hover over it and you plug in the numbers. Okay. The hardest part of that is, I think, things you have to estimate, such as insurance, not knowing exactly what your insurance would be, but you can call an agent, you can call a broker, you can get an estimate, just quickly over the phone. I don't think they're going to answer your call if you call for every single deal you're analyzing and don't actually buy any of them and they're not finding any policies.
Yes.
But there's also so many websites too that you can go on now and just plug in the information and get a quote.
And a lot of them are within like 5 or 10%, right? Like if you're getting a duplex in the same zip code, it's not going to be that different. You're going to be within $100 per year probably, and that hopefully won't be making or breaking your analysis.
Yeah. Or posting in the BiggerPockets forums and just say, hey, I'm looking at duplexes in this area. Does anybody have any there? What is your insurance? You'll get responses from, especially in a big city like San Antonio, you can get a good response rate as to far as people can give you an idea. But there's so many tools out there for, how much can you receive in rent, looking at market rent for properties. So every day I would pick a property on the MLS, even if you can eyeball it and say, there's no way that deal would work, or it's not in your budget. Just practice. So that would be my first thing. Second thing is, in the BiggerPockets forums, you can post your calculator reports. So after you actually enter your information into there, you can save the report, post it to the forums and say, hey, what do you guys think of this? People love to give their advice. They love to criticize. They love to give their feedback, which is going to be great. It's all constructive criticism.
Wouldn't you rather get criticized now than realize you bought a bad deal? And people are nice. It's not like people are being mean about it. They're just going to point out things that maybe you haven't thought of as a first-time investor.
Yeah. And then networking with other investors in the area to really dial down your cost.
Yes.
One idea I had when you were reading that question was, if you feel like the numbers aren't working, is what about the unit that you're living in? Do you have the option of renting out those bedrooms also? So you can bring in more income. So now you have a little less risk because there's more income. Your mortgage payment is still the same. Your expenses are still the same. So if you have the option of renting out one side of the duplex and then also renting out your bedrooms, you can increase the rental income. And then, you have more leeway if your numbers aren't exactly correct because you're bringing in more income on the deal.
Yeah, those are things that you can mess around with to try and get your analysis really crisp and sort of to maximize your return. So this is great advice. I also just want to sort of take the high level sort of philosophical part of this question just for a minute, because I think when you're talking about buying your first deal, a lot of it yes, you should absolutely get really good at deal analysis. There's no substitute for that. You can't get around doing that. But just remember that if you are house hacking and it is your first deal, this doesn't need to be like some grand slam deal where you're making amazing cash flow and everything is perfect. When you're house hacking, if you can just reduce your living expenses by any considerable margin, that's a win, right? If you were spending $1,500 a month on rent and now you're still paying $500 a month in living expenses, it's $1,000 a month that you're saving. That's essentially generating $1,000 a month in cash flow. I actually collaborated with Scott Trench. We built a calculator that's like buy, rent, house hack. And so that's free. You can go to biggerpockets.com/resources and get that for free. But I recommend just thinking about it in those terms. Like, what is going to be the best outcome for you financially over the next couple of years? For most people in most markets, it's going to be house hacking. That's not true in every market, but in a market like San Antonio that's relatively cheap, I'm almost sure that buying in this $250 to $350 price point is going to do better for you than either buying a primary residence or renting. So I think just making sure your expectations are appropriate are really important, especially for this deal and for house hacking. I also just want to underscore what Ashley was saying about practicing, because I think a lot of people kind of scoff at that and they don't want to go do this. But when you were saying that, I was doing this yesterday. I was practicing deal analysis. I wrote a book about deal analysis. So experienced investors do this stuff too. Whether you call it practice or just looking at deals, it's the same thing. Just look at as many deals as you possibly can and you'll get good at it.
Agree with that so much. I can't even tell you how many BiggerPockets calculator reports I have saved in my portfolio from like the last 10 years.
So many.
But now it's gotten to the point where in a very, very specific market, in a very specific duplex, I can eyeball that and I can analyze it like this. Like I can run those numbers in my head because I've done so many. And that gives you such a competitive advantage that you can make decisions quickly when a deal comes up as to yes or no. And obviously there's more that goes into it than just eyeballing it, but you can move faster and you can move quicker when those deals come across. And I think that like building out your buy box so you're not wasting time analyzing deals that you don't even know how to operate or manage, but they look cool because you heard a podcast about them. But really building your buy box and then just exercising that muscle of analyzing deals in that market of what you want to buy, and you'll be able to move quicker and faster.
And luckily, it's not even that hard. You do need to get a feel for it over time, and you do get better at it. But even the first one shouldn't be too hard. And over time, you'll be doing this in like 5 minutes. It's really just not that difficult. So great question, Tanner. You should know that this is a common place that almost every real estate investor finds themselves at some point in the beginning of their investing career. And it just takes that commitment and practice and diligence, and you'll get there. You know, Ashley and I are no different than anyone else. We were in the exact same spot. So just stick with it. All right, let's move on to our next question, which comes from Sophia, who is investing in El Paso, Texas. My husband and I are looking to do our first rehab, and we were wondering how to write a scope of work and determine what material to buy. Does this all come from the general contractor? How does one define design choices? And if we don't live in the city, who is a good person to check in on the construction so we don't have to go every week? Is it our property manager or is it the general contractor to keep us posted? I am very curious to hear your thoughts on this, Ashley, because I am sort of going through this a little bit myself right now and learning some of the bigger scope of work renovation myself. So you've been doing this for a couple of years now. How would you approach this question?
The first thing is I always walk the property first. I want to know like what's going on in there. And if you can't physically walk it, have somebody video, do a video the whole way through and then pictures. So you're going to take pictures like they're walking through the property. Here's the door, I'm walking in. Then here's this side, this side, this side. Go through the whole house, almost like you're walking through but picture to picture, just because pictures are easier to zoom in than on video. I do pencil and paper. I stand there and I stand in the doorway of the mud room and I'm like, this needs to be fixed. This needs to be fixed. And even if you know nothing about construction, you can still eyeball something is wrong. Like the trim is falling off. There's a hole in the drywall. The closet doesn't have like a rack. So, you know, you can go through and just write down the things that you see. I also notate what I want to get rid of. So if kitchen cabinets are getting ripped out, I don't want them to demo that. And then I also notate what is staying. So like maybe there's a unique wood feature of like some cabinet or something that's built in. I would mark that is staying, not getting demoed. So I do that and I walk room for room, and it does take a while. Then I go and I sit on my computer and I type it all up into a nice thing. Then I take that scope of work and I send it to my contractor. My contractor walks the property. So he takes my scope of work and he basically gives his feedback and, makes changes to it or makes suggestions. So the one flip I just did, when my contractor walked the property, he called me on the phone and we went room by room. And he's like, okay, I see here. I think that instead of putting like a regular bathroom door on, you should actually do a pocket door. He's like, there's not a lot of room anyways. Like we can make it a really nice door. So it's like a feature stuff. So like
everyone loves a pocket door.
Yeah. So he gives lots of good feedback. And then from there, I change the scope of work based on his recommendations that we agree on.
How would you go about thinking through the scope of work to make sure that you're providing safe, good, comfortable home that's going to generate rents, but you're not sort of over-developing, over-improving a property that's going to be rented out?
So I learned this from good old James Daynard from Unpermitted Podcast.
Of course, we all have.
Look at the comparables. So like the property I did, it was 1,100 square feet. It was 3 beds, 2 bathrooms, and 1 bathroom was in the basement. So it wasn't even that great of a selling point. But we went through and looked at other properties that had sold in that area as far as what was the expectation, what properties got a little bit more than other ones, and why was that? And like for this situation, it was because the kitchens were updated. So we ripped the whole kitchen out, did everything brand new in the kitchen. And that was a huge selling point of it. So looking at comparables, what have other properties sold for? The really hard part, I think, is matching my design with what the contractor wanted to do or what was easy. So the tile, I wanted the tile done a certain way in the bathroom, and the contractor said, no, this is going to take me so long to actually do because of the way it's laid out, the tile that you picked out, and we went and had to revise that. So that's where, you have to have the understanding with your contractor too, is like some of these details and finishes that I want, what's the actual labor to complete them too when you are picking out finishes. Like you have to not only compare to what other properties are doing, but also think of like the labor cost for some of those finishes that you're picking out too.
And would you say the same thing if you were trying to figure out what something will rent for?
Yeah. So what I used to do for a long time was I started an Excel spreadsheet, and every day I would pull up the market I was in and look at what properties were listed for rent. I would enter them into my Excel spreadsheet. This was very tedious, but I was very motivated. If you really want that deal, you will do this.
Yeah.
And every day I would check. And if a property disappeared and was no longer listed, I would mark it as rented. So if it rented within a week, 2 weeks, most likely it rented for what they were asking. And right now in my market, there's no negotiation. Like properties are renting like this as soon as they're listed for what they're asking. So yeah, that's tracking what things rent for, but then also calling property management companies or like apartment complexes in the area. A lot of websites like apartments.com, a lot of the complexes will keep listings up. Even if there's not anything available, will still say what they rent for. So if you're like me and you feel uncomfortable calling people, you can just call and say like, oh, I'm looking for an apartment. What do your 2 bedrooms go for? Even if they don't have any available, they'll still give you the information. I did have an investor call me before and say, hey, I got this property I'm going to be renting out. It's right across the street from you. Just wondering what you got, what you're getting for rent and things. And like, he was completely honest as to, I'm your competition now across the street. What are you renting for?
Well, I want to get to the second part of this question because this is something I've been thinking about personally. And just as a reminder, Sophia had asked about doing their first rehab. I don't know if it's out of state, but it's long distance. And basically, Sophia asked, who's a good person to check in on the construction so we don't have to go every week? Is it the property manager? Is it the general contractor to keep us posted? I'm curious about this because I've done I guess it would be a medium scope per long distance, but it wasn't like a huge renovation. And I've sort of been hesitant to do a bigger renovation, largely because of this question, because I trust my property manager. I trust probably the contractor. But in my opinion, like everyone needs to be managed. And that's not a knock on the contractor, but whether it's a contractor, property manager, anyone, I wouldn't rely on someone to self-report their own competence and progress. There's got to be a third party, right? And so how would you handle this situation? Would you just fly there yourself? Would you maybe pay the property manager? Because it's not really the property manager's job. Right. How would you go about this?
I would start with the real estate agent. So if you purchase this property using an agent, I would ask them if they would be your boots on the ground and you could pay them extra to go and actually walk the property, send you video, things like that. Where I maybe wouldn't do that is if you got your contractor from the real estate agent. So if they were the ones that referred them, recommended, said they work with them on a lot of houses and things like that, then maybe I wouldn't, because you kind of want that checks and balance. So the property manager, I would ask if they would do that, what the cost would be to add that on, because even when we had a property management company, when they did turnovers, they still charged a project management fee on top of them doing the turnover. So they would probably maybe charge you a project management fee. You could also ask if there was anybody in their office that would want a side job of going to your property once a week, doing an update, things like that. Being cautious of meeting people online, but posting online and asking if there's anybody that lives in that area that's maybe a college student, another investor, they want to get started investing. Maybe they have a duplex themselves. There is that level of like not really knowing the person and you're trusting them to go into this house and things like that. So that's where I would start. I'd start with real estate agent, then property manager, then finding someone that you're paying to be your boots on the ground. And I would definitely find someone that's motivated and excited to be learning about real estate. And, they can see the whole rehab process. You can share with them what it's costing. So they're learning if they want to invest in that market. So those would kind of be the 3 people that I would go through.
But I agree with you. I think finding someone who's like wants to learn the industry, they're going to be curious. Like, if I had this job when I was in my 20s, I would have loved it. I love going to houses. I would have just liked walking around and just talking to the contractor and just taking pictures, because you're just learning. And so there's people like that in every city. So I'm sure whether through BiggerPockets, through a meetup, whatever, you could be able to find that. All right. Well, those are our 3 questions for today. Ashley, thank you so much. Any last thoughts or advice here for our audience?
Well, first of all, a lot of the things that we actually talked about, like building your scope of work, estimating rehab costs, there's actually templates for rookie investors or really anyone that wants to use them in the BiggerPockets resource hub. So you can go to biggerpockets.com/rookie resource to find that.
Awesome. Definitely check that out. All these free resources on BiggerPockets, making your life easier as an investor. So don't forget to check those out. Thank you all so much for listening. And just as a reminder, we found the questions that Ashley and I discussed here today in the BiggerPockets forums. They are another great resource for both rookie and advanced investors. You can ask pretty much anything you want. You can get great, valuable advice, connect with other people in your market. So check that out as well at biggerpockets.com/forums. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next time.